What is up, fight fans? I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut.com, and I'm here to look back at the results of UFC 278, a historic card from Utah, and speak about what could be next for the biggest winners and losers from the Salt Lake City card. First, you have to start with the main event, the welterweight title fight between Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, making history in an unexpected way. The fight will now go down as the epitome, the thesis of a fight is never over until the final bell wins. Leon Edwards wins the welterweight title with 57 seconds left on the clock in a fight he was clearly losing, probably down 4 rounds to maybe 1 the way it was going, and getting dominated for most of the fight. The fight after the first round, after what was a very good round for Leon Edwards, pretty much became a vintage Kamaru Usman fight. Takedowns, classic stuff, dominating with his pressure, overwhelming Leon Edwards, being just as equal as a striker. Leon Edwards didn't have a huge striking advantage until the last moments where he unfurls a nasty head kick, stops Kamaru Usman. It was a historic fight in a lot of ways. It was the first time Kamaru Usman was taken down in the UFC, first loss in the UFC, second overall, first time he's been stopped by a knockout. I mean, just a crazy wild end. It just makes MMA what it is. It's a sport where it really, you never know really what can happen. It is as unpredictable a combat sport there is, with such high level athletes, high level technique. Going on from that, does it at all hurt Kamaru Usman's legacy losing like this? For me, I don't think it does. There's a lot of legendary fighters. Anderson Silva ended history that Kamaru Usman was trying to top by acting silly in the cage and getting knocked out by Chris Weidman. Nothing was more embarrassing than that, and did not hurt Anderson Silva's legacy in the sport. I don't think this hurts Kamaru's legacy in the welterweight division. Heck, George St. Pierre, the guy a lot of people compare him to, and feel he's better than him, he had a bad loss to a much lesser opponent in Matt Serra back in the day, going down as the greatest upset, one of the greatest upsets in UFC history. So yeah, tough loss for Kamaru, doesn't affect his legacy. What's next? Obviously, it's going to be a rematch. That's the fight that has to happen. It's going to be a fascinating trilogy because now it's even at 1-1. It's Kamaru's going into the fight as the challenger, which is going to be very weird to see him not wearing the black and gold championship gear going into that fight. But it's going to be one of the bigger fights in the year. I would imagine it's probably going to be on the 2023 slate, and that's definitely going to happen. Does either man have an edge going into this fight? I don't know. I mean, there has to be something said if you get knocked out that your confidence has to be shaking on some level, and to have the elite level confidence Kamaru had where no one can beat him, that is helpful in such a individual driven sport like MMA. But it's probably a pick'em fight. Kamaru will be the favorite, but not as much as he was in his past fight. Moving on from there, co-main event, Paulo Costa beats Luke Rockhold in a weird, sloppy brawl. A lot of people were loving this fight. I wasn't a big fan of the fight. I didn't think this is anywhere near either a good performance for either man. Clearly, the altitude of Salt Lake City had an effect on both men, clearly in a major way. Luke Rockhold had staph infection going into the fight. That's the weird thing about this fight. Luke Rockhold didn't look great. He was a big underdog. He lost, but you wonder if he didn't have the effects of staph infection going into the fight, then the altitude, then with age, then with ring rust, because he hadn't fought like in 2 years. Maybe he beats Paulo Costa. And in a way, this is not a great performance for Paulo Costa. He barely inks by on a guy he should have been, who's coming up with various things. It was an interesting fight. It was entertaining on a level, but wasn't high-level MMA at its best, especially when you see what happens in the main event and everything. Going on from there, was the right move for Luke Rockhold to retire immediately after? Yes. He's 0-3 in his last 3 fights, 1-4 in his last 5. 3 of his losses have been by KO. 5 fights in the last 6 years. I mean, he really peaked in 2016, when he lost to Michael Bisping. That was his peak period. That was a very long time ago. His body isn't what it once was, and getting a staph infection before this fight is an example of like just his body failing him, and it just isn't up to the rigors of this particular sport anymore. Nothing against that. He would go down as a great middleweight, 2 promotion champion, Strikeforce champion. What's next for Paulo Costa? I mean, possible fights to me with Derek Brunson make a lot of sense. Jack Hermanson, both of those are top 10 level middleweights, but they're a little bit, they've been knocked down a peg or so in recent fights and not in contention. Neither is Paulo Costa, but maybe it's a big fight in the division that matters. It helps them get in contention for 2023. The other big fight, bantamweight clash between Merab Dvalishvili versus Jose Aldo. Merab wins. If you weren't a believer in Merab Dvalishvili before this fight, you need to be a believer in the machine. He has a similar style to like the Diaz brothers. While the Diaz brothers have more of a high output punching, striking, this guy's his pressure style high level output, maybe not as dangerous as the Diaz brothers, but then the wrestling, like, he is a force of nature that is really difficult to deal with. It's not fancy, it's not flashy, but if you can do that to Jose Aldo, who's still a very good fighter, despite all the years he's been in the sport, that's saying something. He completely nullified Jose Aldo. He seemed confused, unsure, very defensive as the fight went on, and he just warmed down and just made it in ways that kind of easy, which is saying something, because very few people have gotten wins like that over the legend as Jose Aldo. He is a legitimate force, maybe a title contender, maybe he gets title fight, probably not, because he admitted he won't fight Aljamain Sterling, so I'm really not sure what's next for him. It's unfortunate he's blocked by his close friend, but top level elite athlete. He needs the respect. He needs respect to his name. Moving on from there, Jose Aldo, I think this pretty much ends Jose Aldo's pursuit of being a UFC champion again. He's just too far down the line. He can't go back to going back to featherweight wouldn't seem as interesting. He's still behind a few people at bantamweight. Going off him, I wouldn't. That doesn't mean he's still a good fight. Still a very good fighter. Only, I believe, 35 years old. I would like to see him maybe fight Dominic Cruz, and like kind of a Legends fight. Dominic Cruz doesn't fight Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar also has suggested fight Cruz. I would like to see either, those two fights with him. That would be interesting. Or maybe he gets the loser of Dillashaw and Aljamain Sterling. That could be a very interesting fight too. Aljamain wants to fight Aldo. Dillashaw versus Aldo was talked about a little bit. That would be good. So maybe he gets the loser of that, and maybe he finds a way to jump right back into contention for next year. Other notable fights on the card that are worth talking about. Marcin Tybura got a very big win versus Alexander Romanov, going back to the Paulo Costa, Luke Rockhold, on how altitude had an effect on that fight. Clearly, altitude affected Romanov. He wrestled, dominated early, was throwing Marcin Tybura around, ragdolled him, and it completely tired him out. And by the last 2 rounds, Marcin Tybura showed his experience. He experienced at a high level, his knowledge, and he outworked him, giving this young upcoming star his first loss. That doesn't mean Alexander Romanov is not legit. I think he is. This is just going to be one of those learning moment kind of fights where he's going to look back and he learned a lot from it and became a better fighter from it. But Marcin Tybura, elite level gatekeeper, and he showed why. Yeah, some people can beat him. You got to get by him to be an elite guy, but if you're not ready yet, you're not going to beat him. Also, another big notable fight, Amir Albazi's win over Francisco Figueiredo, Davis and Figueiredo's brother. Good performance, first round submission. I think it's his second first round finish in his last 3 fights. A definite flyweight on the rise that people need to keep their eyes on. He's a very good fighter. He's got an interesting story, having been born and grew up in Iraq and having to migrate somewhere else because of, all the turmoil in that part of the world. So interesting story. But that is the main storylines on the biggest winners and losers from UFC 278.